Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar. My name is Andrew Townsend. I'm with eLearning Brothers. Today we are going to be talking about how to steal from human-centered design to better engage your learners. This webinar will be recorded. We'll get a copy of it out to all attendees, all registrants shortly after the webinar today. If you have questions during this webinar, we'll be ready to answer questions in the questions panel, and we'll try to get some of those questions brought up to Josh as well. So feel free to use that questions panel as you need it. We'll get to as many of these as we can. If we get to some questions that we can't answer or we don't have time to answer, we'll be sure to get those answered in the webinar recap later in the week when we post the video online on our site. To talk to us about human-centered design, we have Josh Bleggi, our learning designer, with us today. Thanks, Josh, for taking some time to come and visit with us.
No problem. I'm happy to be here.
We're super stoked to see what you have to share with us. Just so you know, one of the things we like to do after the webinar is try to follow up as soon as possible. Sometimes it's just to get feedback. Most of the time, we want to touch base and find out if anyone needs more information one-on-one about the webinar topic after the fact. Also, we're going to be giving everyone in attendance a free eLearning Brothers account. So if you don't already have one, you can be looking forward to that. Be checking your email and we'll get that sent out to you. All right, so without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn the time over to you, Josh.
Okay.
I will pass the screen to you as well.
Great. Okay, so now that we got that figured out, welcome everybody. I'm excited to talk about this with you today. So human-centered design is a discipline that I've been learning quite a bit about in the last year or so. And I found that it really helps me understand what my learners need to understand as we're developing courses for them. Before we get really into the meat of this, I just want to ask you a couple of questions. So Andrew's going to open up a poll for you to answer this, but I'm just wondering what your role in e-learning development is, so that way I can understand who I'm talking to today. So feel free to take a few seconds to answer that for us. If you don't fit into one of these categories up here, please feel free to let us know in the chat panel.
You can go ahead and click right on the screen to participate in this poll. We just want to know if you're an e-learning designer and trainer, an e-learning developer, a learning manager, subject matter expert, and then like Josh said, if you need to use other, go ahead and use that chat panel and let us know. Let's see, it looks like we have an early tally, a lot of instructional designers and trainers out there. I'll give you guys a few more seconds, maybe 3 more seconds to vote. 2, 1, and here's those results. So yeah, 62% of our audience is instructional designers or trainers, 22 is e-learning developers, and then we've got a couple learning managers and LMS administrators. I'm looking at the other, also a teacher with a strong interest in e-learning.
Okay.
Yeah, learning architects. So yeah, a lot of really clever people out here in our audience
fantastic
today.
Yeah, that's a very wide base of audience there. So my next question for you guys is then, how much experience do you have with human-centered design? You know, your choices here, if you've never heard of it before, I've heard of it but want to learn more, I'm a dabbler, I'm an HCD rock star, or other, obviously, and tell us, you know, what your experience is over there. So again, the poll is open for you, so feel free to answer that.
Human-centered designer is something I had only heard of, and I'm excited to learn more. That's me. But our audience is in a similar boat. I'll give you guys a couple more seconds to vote, maybe 3 more seconds. And here's those results. 48% have heard of it, but they want to learn more.
Okay.
38% never heard of it. 12% dabble in it, and we have a 3% human-centered design rock star.
Oh, nice. So there's a few of you out there. That's fantastic.
That's great. But
for most of you, so this is your first kind of introduction into human-centered design. So I really want to start off by answering that question of, you know, what is HCD? And for a lot of people, you're probably a little confused by the acronym human-centered design, because there's a few other acronyms out there that are very similar. I mean, there's user experience design, so UX, there's HCI, human computer interaction. A lot of these things really are based off of these same types of principles that human-centered design is. But to give us a good definition, I pulled this from a company called IDEO, which IDEO is a design firm that's been around since at least the late 80s, from what I can tell. And their first big project was they actually designed the first computer mouse for Apple back in the late 80s. And so they've been around in the design community for a long time and are really a pioneer of this human-centered design concept. In a lot of ways, it's actually attributed to them as far as the creation of this. But really what human-centered design is a design process that is it's a creative approach to problem solving that starts with the people that you're designing for and ends with new solutions that are tailor-made to suit their needs. So what that means is they keep the individual that you're designing for at the center of their whole design process. And so this principle of HCD, this methodology, is really come into, I guess you could say, come into vogue in the last decade or so with the rise of user experience design, which is used to design apps and websites and other physical products as well. And so this idea of keeping the user at the forefront of your mind. So some of you are probably wondering at this point, okay, so how does this apply to me? And so I want you to think for a second about what some of the similarities between designing a course and designing a product are. And I want to hear some of your responses to this. So if you could please put those in the chat panel, question panel over there for us. Andrew will read some of those off, and we'll see what you guys think.
All right, so some early responses coming in. Usability. People take a course, people use products, need an idea, concept first, start with a problem. There's a user or learner for both. Needs to be user-friendly and intuitive, understanding the goals of your user. Both products and learning experience need to be usable by the target audience.
Fantastic, yeah.
Very easy, very intuitive. Begin with the end user in mind, know your user. Nature of the demand of design. Keeping the end in mind. A lot of these are being focused on. It's important to know where you want to be at the end, to better plan at the beginning.
Fantastic.
Assessing knowledge, agile method. Always subject to change. Ouch, but true.
Yeah, that is very true.
Product versus what the learner does.
Okay.
This person says it's important to have experience in mind, not just content.
Fantastic. That's a great response. That's exactly true.
One person asks, is it safe to say that this approach is to counter instructor-centered design?
I would say yeah, because if I'm understanding what you mean by that, an instructor-centered design, means that you're building basically just whatever content you think is important. And this is exactly the opposite of that, where we're focusing on what the learner wants and needs versus what we think they need. So those are all great responses. Like, you guys seem to have a really great handle on this. I just want to share with you a few of my thoughts, and a lot of these went along with the things that were said. Obviously, we need to know our target audience. The success of our product or our experience depends more on what the audience needs and wants. So keeping that end user in mind, that experience in mind. What we create is only effective as effective as the effect it has on the end user. But a couple things there as well. It's really easy to make wrong assumptions. We can kind of maybe develop something that doesn't need to be developed. And there's a lot at stake. What if we get guessed wrong? So like if we operate just purely on assumptions, we can waste a lot of time and money and effort on things that might not be worthwhile to our end users. But fantastic, like there's definitely some great responses there that went in line exactly with what we're talking about today. One of the core principles to all of this that I want you to keep in mind is this idea of empathy. Now, for some of you, you probably have an idea of what empathy is. Maybe you've heard it used before when you're taking different trainings or just in the day-to-day of life. But for our purposes today, I want to make sure that we have a clear definition of what empathy is. And so to do that, I went directly to Merriam-Webster's dictionary and got this very clearly defined definition of empathy. And that's the action of understanding, being aware of, being sensitive to, and vicariously experiencing the feelings, thoughts, and experience of another. So if I'm understanding this correctly, it's meaning that we understand another person to the point where we can figure out what's best to help them. And for us as learning developers, designers, that's really important, because what we're trying to do with any learning experience that we're developing is we're trying to get them from point A to point B and make their life better because of that. And so we really need to keep in mind the person that we're designing for as we do that and be empathetic towards them. But for some of you, you're probably thinking, okay, how do we do this? How do we develop learner empathy? Because a lot of people, some people are naturally talented at it. Personally, I kind of struggle with it. It's a harder concept for me to get behind, and so I usually fall back on a few tools that I've learned. And all these come from the human-centered design approach, and can be used in a variety of different ways. But I just want to go through those with you right now to help you understand how to develop learner empathy. So the first tool that I want to discuss is learner research. And now learner research is something you might be familiar with. I mean, all of us, when we're developing a course, we go out and do a bunch of research to make sure that we have the right content in there. We talk to SMEs and make sure that we understand what we're trying to teach. But we also need to look at a different kind of approach to our research here, and that's focusing on, okay, who are our learners? And so this can be done in a couple different ways. And so there's a couple of primary ways to go out and find information, and this is research that you go out and do yourself. And those include interviews and observations. Now in interviews, you can go out and talk to your end users, or your SMEs are actually a good resource as well to tell you, okay, this is the person that you're designing for, this is what they're like. And you go out there and you try to get to know them on a deep level of, you know, what motivates them, what goals do they have in life, because you'll need that information later on. Another way to get some good information is just go out and observe behavior. Observe your end user in their natural habitat, basically, like I like to refer to it as professional people watching. I say that with a little bit of a caveat though. With observations, you want to make sure that people that are being observed kind of know that they're being observed, or else it just gets into some awkward situations. And like my best piece of advice to you is, if you get out there and you start observing people, just let them know that you're there, because otherwise you might get a call from HR that you don't want, and that's how you know you've done something wrong in this process. And so you just want to make sure that you're being respectful in that. But with both these approaches here, I understand that they're not always possible. There might be some time prohibitions on it. There might be some just, you know, other resources that might play into it, that you just can't get out there and do this stuff. And that's completely understandable. That doesn't mean that you can't, you know, gain this empathy other ways. And so a couple other approaches that I'd recommend using are surveys and secondary research. Now, surveys are a pretty easy thing to develop these days. We have so many tools out there to help us. My favorite is actually Google Forms, just because of how easy and the fact that it's free, and that you have some pretty good analytics behind it, especially if you're familiar with Excel or Google Sheets at all. It gives you some really good tools there. Some downsides to surveys though is obviously you're dealing with a response rate that might not be so great. So you're basing it off of people that may or may not respond, and so that may skew your data a little bit there. And then lastly, like secondary research, which is basically anything that comes from a third party. And these can include things like, you know, a simple Google search to find what's out there on the web, or going to like trade articles and publications. And once you've gained all this knowledge from your research, you need a good way to distill that down. And so these next two tools will help you with that. So the first one that I want to talk about is what's called a learner persona. And what a learner persona is it's a fictional or archetypal character that represents your learner group. And so you're developing some sort of representation of all this information that you've gathered through your research. And it really answers the question, who are we designing for? Now, for me, like the way I think about this is kind of silly, but please go with me for a second here. I kind of think of this as a D&D character sheet. Now, for those of you that haven't played Dungeons and Dragons before, what a character sheet does is it gives you all of your characters, the character that you're taking on during the scenario that you're playing through. It gives you all their weaknesses, their attitudes, their, you know, whatever information you need, and it allows you to get in the head of that character and play the game as if you were that character. Now, again, like I said, this might seem a little silly, but really, this is a good example of developing empathy for someone, because you're getting inside their head and seeing what their motivations are and acting upon those motivations. And for us, that's what we want to develop. And so I'm going to show you a persona now, what these look like. Now, this is an example of a template that we created here at ELB. And the nice thing about this template is it's actually available to you just on the panel there. There's a worksheet section, I believe that's what it's called, where this is available to you as a PDF and a editable PowerPoint. And so after this webinar, you can take this and use this and customize it to your needs. And the nice thing about personas is there's not really too much that is a really like strict regimented, you need to include this, this, and this to it. And so these really are just whatever you want to put on there. So I'm going to just walk you through what I put on mine, so that way you have an idea of what you can do with yours. But really, a persona can take whatever information you need.
Real quick, he mentioned that this is a template that you can grab. So if you go and you go to webinar control panel, there is a handout section. So you can just go ahead and grab that there. And we'll also make sure this is available in the recap. So if you guys forget to download it now, we'll get it to you some other way.
Yeah, great. So let's start just walking through this really quick here. So the first thing that we include on here are what I call identifiers, and these include things like a name, a picture, and maybe some other personal details. Now the reason this is important is because an image put on there helps you understand who you're looking at. It gives you a humanizing element to these personas. It says, you know, this person kind of looks like this, and that gives you a good idea of what they would maybe act like as well by what they look like. The name kind of serves two purposes as well. It helps you humanize them because you gave them a name. Because you think about it in a design process, if you're referring to somebody as persona 1, then that's not very personal at all. You're not really empathizing with the person that you're trying to design for. But when you give them a name, like for us, it's Sean Stickman is this guy that we're using today. Now this is actually a real persona that we do use within customizable courseware, which is the main product that I do work on here at ELB. And so we have this Sean Stickman character who we talk about all the time, and we say, you know, Sean's doing this or doing that today. What do we need him to do? And so we figured Sean was maybe about 30 years old, so he's kind of midway through his career. This helps us understand that he may have gone through some training before, and now we need to make sure that he's just kind of given the refresher stuff versus someone that may be, you know, an 18 to 21-year-old that's just starting out on their career path, right? Who needs a very in-depth, this is how you do this to stay safe, kind of training. And so that's why I included an age there, just to gauge where he's at in his career. As well as his occupation, we've included that here just simply to say, okay, this is the type of person that we're building this course for. We're building this towards, you know, people that are line workers, maybe working in a warehouse, maybe working, you know, in other jobs that are you know, kind of the blue collar type stuff. So that helps us understand maybe his education level, his, you know, his career path, things like that. Good things to keep in mind. Now you can include other things in here, like I've seen some that have like marital status, other likes and dislikes, things like that, like any sort of personal stuff that you want to include here that will be relevant to what you're designing for.
Like if they're a Dungeons and Dragons fan.
Yeah, like if they're a Dungeons and Dragons fan, or, you know, they have other likes and dislikes similar to that. The next section that I include on here is a motivations. And so this is what motivates this individual to act. So like intrinsically inside of them, what motivates them. And so some people are motivated purely by, you know, power and authority, right? And others are motivated more by maybe, I just want to get my job done. I just want to have this personal growth. Other people are motivated by fear. And you keep those in mind as you're building your courses, because depending on how you're, you know, framing your material, you could be trying to motivate someone that, you know, is greatly motivated by, you know, achieving something great, in a way that's actually more appropriate for someone that's, you know, more power oriented. Maybe it's through like saying, you know, you'll be, by following these principles, you'll be able to be promoted earlier in your career, things like that, which is more of a power thing versus an achievement as, you know, you're going to stay safer today because of this, right? So you just want to keep those motivations in mind, because that's really, like, you want to keep that in mind just so that way you know that your learners that you're motivating your learners in the appropriate manner to learn the material that you're presenting. The next section that I put on here is a personality traits. And for me, what this does is it tells me, okay, this is the type of person that I'm dealing with. I'm dealing with in this case, a fun, loving, kind, service-oriented, outgoing type person who, to me, that means that he doesn't take life very seriously. And so if I'm designing a course that's purely just, maybe a bunch of equations, a bunch of facts, and just making it very information heavy, he may not be responding to that in the best way possible. But if I design something that's a little more fun, interactive, maybe gamified, he's going to respond to it better and learn better in that format versus, like the previous one that I mentioned. And so like personality does play a key role in how people learn, and we need to keep that in mind. The next section is a goals section, and this is actually a very key point to this that's included on pretty much any persona that I've seen, because this is really what we're trying to build towards with our learning experiences. So this is, what does this person want to achieve most in life? And so we're thinking about this not just as at a task level of, okay, they want to, stay safe today, they want to make sure that they're using the forklift appropriately today, something like that. What we're really looking at is, okay, at the end of the day, what is their goal in their life? And so for like Sean, this top one really speaks to, I think, what Sean is looking for. It says he wants to stay safe so he can be able to spend more time with his family outside of work. And so really, like, that's his motivation, is he wants to just do his job, stay safe, and go home. Like, he wants to be able to have some time that's outside of his work. But then as well at work, he wants to lead by example by demonstrating safe behavior, and he also wants to avoid injuries and safety violations. And so these are just his kind of key goals that he's trying to achieve, and these are things that we can teach towards to help them out.
So we've got a couple questions about these persona examples. First of all, how do you find out this information? Do you have any special techniques that you use to get this information?
So it really goes back to that research that we've been doing. And so what I like to do is I take all the information that I have from interviews and surveys that I send out, and I like to look at all the responses for each question, because I like to use the same questions for my interviews and my surveys. Interviews, you might get a little more into the why of why they do things, but I like to compare all those things together and then pull out a key insight from each question that I'm looking at, and then I distill that down into these goals. And so I'd like to say there's some magical process that I use, but really it just comes down to analyzing the data and then coming up with a conclusion based off of that data to find out what would motivate them, what their goals are. And a lot of these, like the motivations and the personality traits, you get that by interacting with people, and you see, okay, majority of the people I interacted with were, very happy-go-lucky or very serious. That will help you understand. So that's, like I said, that's where that research comes into play and becomes very important, because it helps you build this out.
So in gathering that research, there's a couple questions about, are there questionnaires that you've made that you can share with people to help identify a person's motivations, or as people are building their own questionnaires, what kind of information? I guess they're looking for just tips. So you're mentioning I did research, I did surveys, I did questionnaires.
So,
but if we're starting from ground level, we don't have any of that information.
That's a very good question, and that's actually something we could do an entire webinar blog article on. So I think what we'll do with that one is, there are some questionnaires that we can provide for you to show you examples of good questions to ask. So what we'll do is we'll provide that in a blog at a later date. And make sure that you get access to that as well, because I feel like that's something that I don't necessarily have enough time to cover right now.
Sure.
But it's very important.
There's one more question here. This is just to clarify. So these personas, you're not making these for every single person that you interview. You're making these for learner types? Or?
Learner types, yeah. Okay. So you're looking at, you're not distilling, okay, talk to Joe. Okay, what's Joe like? Okay, this, and this. Or I talk to Sally. This is what Sally's like. You're looking at, okay, I have all this information about Joe, Sally, Frank, Bob, Henry, all these people combined together. Collectively, what are they like? So you're taking, all the responses they gave and distilling that down into these different types of learners. Now, you will have, in most cases, multiple personas that you're building towards. Like for us, we have this mid-level guy. We also have, I can't remember what we call him, Joey over here. That's, he's a younger guy that's building up his career over here. And then we have, their boss over here that, he might be taking these as, at a different level. And so we have these different personas that we build towards. What you want to keep in mind, though, is you can start to get kind of confused about what you're trying to achieve. And so with personas, there's actually kind of two levels to them. So there's a primary persona and a secondary persona. And the primary persona is the one that you keep in mind all the time as you're building. And there's usually maybe 1 to 2 of those that you're building towards. There's not going to be like 5 different primary personas. If you try to do that and build towards 5 different people, there are different types of people, you're really not going to build towards anybody or really get what you want to accomplish. But that's where you have a second tier of like secondary personas, which are the people that they're not the primary person that these courses are for, but they are going to be taking these courses. And so that would be, in our case, that would be like the bosses of these workers, right? People that aren't necessarily going to be taking these all the time, but they will be responsible for something with these.
Okay. I know I said that was the last question. I have one more on this topic here. So if you're actively going out and asking people questions, and then you're also observing them to get their information, how often do you find yourself saying, you know what, they're probably changing their behavior because they know they're being watched?
That can happen. And that's where you kind of, like I mentioned earlier, you want to make sure that they know that they're being observed. But I should qualify that a little bit and say, you at least need to know there's someone in authority know that you're watching them. So that way they know if they do get a complaint, they know what's going on. But that does happen. I mean, we all do that. I mean, we see somebody watching us and we're either going to be on our best behavior or we're going to change something that we're doing. And so you kind of want to make sure that you can validate that somehow, if at all possible, which might be by asking a supervisor some questions, saying, hey, look, I observed this behavior. Is that fairly normal? Or going to a subject matter expert and saying, have you observed this kind of behavior before? And getting those kind of second opinions kind of helps you qualify, the observational data to make sure that it's, actually valid as you're going through. Because yeah, you're right, that can happen.
Okay, excellent. We have so many comments and questions, but I want to make sure that we make some progress. So we'll take more questions later on.
Okay, great, fantastic. And so here, like we just got done talking about goals. So these are things that people want to achieve that we want to help them achieve. But on the flip side of that, you have their frustrations. And this is things that are about their situation that frustrate them the most. And so these are things you want to keep in mind because you want to try to combat these as you're developing your training. So for like Sean, his problems are safety regulations are super confusing. I don't have a lot of time to worry about safety all the time, but I get in trouble all the time because I'm supposed to know this stuff. And so we want to help him, overcome these frustrations. And for this, it might be we make this so easy that he can understand, any safety regulation that he's given. We give him maybe tools and devices to help him understand these things. So there's things that we can do to help him overcome these frustrations. So we want to keep these along with the goals in mind as we're developing our courses and our experiences. You might notice here that these are bulleted items. And I just want to let you know that like 3 is not significant really. There's no significance as to why I chose that number. It's just for me, it was, it's an easy number to keep in mind. So if I had like 5 goals on here, that's fine. If I had 5 frustrations, that's fine. If I had 1 of each, that'd be fine as well. You don't necessarily need to have exactly 3. But for me personally, keeping 3 in mind is about all that I can keep in mind at one time. So this is for me as a designer saying, okay, I know he has these 3 and these 3 goals and these 3 frustrations. I know I can handle that. I know I can build towards that. I can design towards that. But really, if you have, a guy that has maybe, like you said, maybe 1 of each, or maybe 5 of each, that's fine too to include on here. Just make sure that whatever you're designing towards, you can handle designing towards that, if that makes sense. Next section here on the persona is a bio, and this bio is actually to me kind of one of the funner exercises in developing these personas, because it's where I started thinking about all the data and information and try to say, okay, what is this person like in their day-to-day life? So maybe it's a day-to-day experience, maybe it's their life in general. And usually for me, I actually start writing that as a paragraph or 2. Sometimes I get up to a page when I'm talking about them because I just get excited talking about them and figuring out what their life is like. But then when I put that onto the persona, I want to make it into something digestible. So I try to pick out the few takeaways that I want from that. And so here you see like 5 key things that I wanted to know about Sean that I put on here as his bio. Again, this can get as long as detailed as you want, but just make sure that you can use it in an effective way.
This is really where the peak of your role-playing game skills come in.
Exactly. Yeah, and this is also where the peak of empathy comes in, because you're definitely getting inside their head and try to think about them as you're writing this about them. Then the last thing that, put this the wrong way, sorry about that. The last thing that we include on here is a quote, and this is, if this person could tell you anything, what would it be? And so this is taking everything that you know about this person, distilling it down into something that they would tell you. And so for us, with Sean here, it says, I get that safety training is important, but its regulations are so complicated, and I just want to get my job done right and go home. And so this tells me like everything I need to know about Sean by just one quote here. And that's really what you're trying to drive towards. And honestly, within your interviews and surveys, there might be that one quote that tells you everything, as you're taking notes, as you're listening back on recordings, if you record them. But a lot of times you just have to come up with it on your own. And so that creates a very good tool to develop empathy there. And so that's a persona. Like I said, this is what they look like for me. This might be different for you. You might be able to put on some different information that you want. But again, this template is available to you in that worksheet section, as well as we'll have that available for you after the webinar as well. So that way you have some good building block to go on to. The next thing that I want to talk about is another tool to develop empathy, known as an empathy map. And what an empathy map is it's like a brainstorming framework used to understand the goals and emotions of a learner. And this was developed, I think, is back in like 2009-ish, developed by a company called Explain under the leadership of this guy named Dave Gray, to create this exercise. And really, the way that this exercise is meant to be I guess carried out is by drawing the diagram that I'm going to show you on the next slide here on a whiteboard, and collaborate as a team to answer a bunch of questions. This can be done though by one person. You can do this exercise alone. It's best to do it with a group if you can, but I understand that we have a lot of teams of one out there in the e-learning industry. So I want to understand that you can still accomplish this as well. But let me show you what this looks like. Okay, so this is what's called the empathy map canvas. And one thing I should point out is I wrote about this in a blog for ELB a couple weeks ago that you can go back and read as well. But at that time, I hadn't realized that it had been updated. In the course of developing this webinar, I found an updated version of this from Dave Gray on Medium. And so Andrew's actually going to post the link to that.
I'll stick that in the chat, and you guys can click that and check it out.
And so that's his explanation as to why they updated things and what they updated, as well as it gives you a link to download this template, because I want to make sure he gets credit where credit's due. And so we didn't develop this as a template for you, but we encourage you to download it and use it in your development still. And so here with this canvas in mind, this empathy map canvas, you'll notice a few things about this. Number one, there's a huge Charlie Brown head in the middle there. And some of you are probably thinking, that's the silliest thing I've ever seen inside the middle of a chart. And you're probably wondering exactly why is that there? Is that crucial? Do I need this thing in there? And the answer is yes, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. But this is very formatted in this way for a very, very specific purpose. And that's why you have the different quadrants, and that's why it's numbered the way that it is this is meant to be a process where you start with 1 and go to 7. And there's different reasons why you do that along the way. So I'm just going to start going through this. And so this first part here, so these first 2 sections, you'll notice that they're kind of shaded on this document here. And this is a goals section. And this is what he actually added to this when he updated the canvas. And so we're going to look at this first here. So your number 1 here is, who are we empathizing with? Now this might sound kind of familiar, because this is exactly what a persona is who are we trying to understand? What are they like? What's the situation that they're in? What is their role in the situation? And so you start with that understanding. And if you've already done persona, this step should be super easy for you to understand and be able to carry out. Step number 2 in this process is, what do they need to do? And again, this might sound pretty familiar because this is a goal. And so you keep their goals in mind, but as well think about what they want as an end of that. So it's not just the goal itself, but what do they want to have accomplished, and when will they know that they've been successful? And so you put that in quadrant 2. In quadrant 3, you think about what are they seeing. So what are they seeing around in their environment? What are they seeing as far as trainings that they've been through? So think about content they may have seen in the past. What do they see others doing and saying? So what are their supervisors' behavior like? You know, things like that. And then this last question that they ask here as kind of as a lead into doing this is, you know, what are they watching and reading? And this, to me, like seems to say, okay, what kind of content do they respond to? You know, what could we do with that and build our courses out that way to see what kind of content would be appealing to them. Section number 4 goes into what do they say. So from your surveys or from your interviews and surveys, what have you heard them say before? So what are they saying as far as like problems that they're having, challenges that they're facing, things that they want to accomplish, you know, what are they saying there, or what can we imagine them saying? So if you are only able to do like secondary research, think about that. You know, what can we imagine them saying? Like what would you assume they would say about, you know, trainings that they've been through or their experiences? And then number 5 is what do they do? So what's their behavior like today? What behavior have we observed? What can we imagine them doing if we weren't able to observe them? Things like that. So that gets into, you know, how do they act, and, you know, how does that influence, you know, who they are as a person as well by how they act. Number 6, this one's a little bit trickier, and I don't fully comprehend entirely this one. What do they hear? So what are they hearing, you know, other people say? What are they hearing from friends, colleagues, and hearing secondhand? So just, you know, in their environment, what are some of the things that are influencing them is more how I take it. And, you know, what are they hearing and being influenced by externally there? And then step 7, which is your last step here, is actually, like, we cut it off a little bit here so it could fit on the slide, but this is actually inside of the head. So the big Charlie Brown head that we looked at. And this is very actually key to how this was designed, because those first 6 steps are behaviors that we can observe and we can see with our own eyes. We can go out and, you know, look at what's going on, what do they do, we can observe their behavior. But step 7 is actually where we get to true empathy, which is where we get into, you know, what are their fears, frustrations, anxieties, wants, needs, hopes, dreams. We get into all these things that are very intrinsic, very personal, things that, you know, these are hard to nail down. Like, I'm not going to say this is an easy process, but, you know, these are things that are very, you know, just gets into the meat of who they are and what they want out of their life. There's also a section for other thoughts and feelings that might motivate their behaviors as well. And so this whole process builds out to, like I said, this template here. This exercise, like I said, it's very daunting. It can seem kind of daunting, kind of difficult, but it's actually, if you start going through it, it's easier than you think. And especially if you've developed a persona before, then it helps to inform you on these decisions. And so if you're going to go through this process, I do recommend doing this last in this empathizing process, because it will help you. It will help you to have those other resources beforehand. And also on this one, you do want to get, like in both cases on personas and this, you do want to get as specific as you possibly can, because when you get into specifics, that's how you empathize with somebody. If I generally know that, say Andrew here, you know, I generally know that he's feeling frustrated. Well, great, I know that he's frustrated, but what is he frustrated by? And that's where you get to true empathy. And so those are the tools that I personally use. And so just to kind of recap here, and then we'll take some of the questions that have been posed. I just want you to remember to keep your learners first and develop empathy for them. Using these tools can greatly help you do that. And so being able to conduct that learner research, developing the personas, and using the empathy map can really help you achieve that target of gaining empathy for your learner.
Okay, this is great because we have some time for questions.
Fantastic.
And boy, do we have questions.
Okay.
Most of our questions involves collecting the data to fill out the persona sheet.
Okay.
So first of all, people want to know where they can get even more information. Not everybody is a Dungeons and Dragons dungeon master from days of yore, but so First of all, my understanding is that you've got blogs coming out that outline more of this information. Is that right?
We will have blogs coming out that will detail more in depth of this process of how do you gather the right information to gain empathy. And so you'll see those coming out here in the next little while.
elearningbrothers.com/elearning-blog is where you can find those, or elearningbrothers.com and then click on blog. That's also a way to get there. Okay, so another question, again, about these persona maps.
Okay.
Is it better to group similar positions together to classify those personas? And likewise, do you only interview a small sampling and then just make assumptions for the rest of the group, or how far do you take your research to get this information?
So you'll have to go back to that first part of that question. So I'll answer the second part for you. So how far do you go with your research? You go as far as you can, as far as you need to. I wouldn't say you need to interview everybody in the office to get that information. I would recommend getting a handful of people at the beginning. And so in most cases, you may be able to do 5 to 10, like just get as many as you can within your your limitations of your resources and time. You don't worry about getting everybody represented in this, because you can make assumptions, and you can use those to influence how you write your personas and whatnot as well. And the first part of that question was, do you group similar titles into one persona? Is that what it?
Right. Do you like positions, or do you actually try to find different personality types? How do you?
It really depends on how what works best for you. So you can group them as, okay, this is what a manager is like, this is what a worker is like, right? You can categorize them that way, but you can also say, well, I have this one guy, like I found this persona within both managers and employees that are going to be taking this, that they're motivated by this one thing, or seem to be saying all the same things over here, while this other group's been saying this stuff over here, but they cross the lines of that role, right? And so you have to use your best judgment on that, of what's going to help you develop empathy the best. And for me, that's usually, it just depends on the purpose of the product as well. Because I've worked on products in the past where I've had to focus on, I had a manager and an employee, right? And I had to focus on that and then develop personas within that based off of how they thought. But I've also had the experiences where it's like, well, they're all going to be taking this training, so what's some of the generalizations I can make about this whole group of people that are going to be working?
Sure, excellent. There are several questions about validation of your persona map.
Okay.
So once you've developed it, do you take it back to the learners to validate? Do you not do that? Do you get it approved by someone? Does it need approval? Is this just for you as a designer, or what do you do with that map afterwards? Does it need to be looked at by other people?
No, it doesn't. Like if your manager asks for validation on it and wants to see it, absolutely show it to them. You don't need to take it back to the people that you interviewed and validate it that way. I mean, there's nothing saying you can't do that, but this is really for you as a designer, and is a document or an artifact that you're going to be using in your process. And so this is purely for you as a designer to use and empathize with. Now, one of the best suggestions that I have for you, though, is once you develop these, is you take it across your organization and use it in different departments or different aspects of the team. So you do make sure everybody's on board with it, but you don't necessarily have to get validation or approval or things like that nature, because you're the one that did the research. And so yeah, your end users might be able to validate it for you, but your boss didn't do that research. And so he just might be adding some assumptions in there that don't need to be there. And so that's one thing with personas, is in some organizations you do need to fight to have them heard and have them used. And as designers, that's something where you need to stick to your guns and be like, no, this is the person that we're designing for, because this is what we found from the research. And in most cases, I found, like, if you can back it up by saying this is what the research found, and you can show those details to your boss or whatnot, it really helps you in that process of defending that persona.
Excellent, perfect. You had mentioned at the beginning there was a survey tool that you'd mentioned.
Yeah. So there's a few out there, and so the ones that I'm familiar with that I primarily use is actually Google Forms, which is available just as part of the G Suite apps. Anybody can really get access to it if you have a Gmail account. And it's a fantastic program because it's a really simple builder. It's set up in a very simple way and has a lot of robust features that it's built out for such a basic free program. And the thing that I find most compelling about it is the analytics on the back end, because it used to just give you like a Google Sheet with all the responses in it, which is fantastic once you learn how to use Excel, which back, a few years ago, I didn't have that much experience. And so it kind of was a little bit daunting at that time. But what they do now is they group all the responses by the question. And they'll show you graphs if you ask yes or no questions, or if you give A, B, C, D answers, or they'll just give you the responses if you asked completely open questions. And so it just gives you a great way to distill all that information and look at it in a very easy format as well. But there's also like SurveyMonkey is another one that I've heard of. I haven't had experience with that. But there's other tools out there that are free or your organization might already pay for that you can use for that.
And to help get accurate information, a lot of these can be done anonymously.
Absolutely, yeah.
Excellent. Do you have, here's a great one. What kind of mistakes have you made when trying to understand the learner that we should avoid or try to learn from?
The biggest thing that I've done before is leading questions in interviews, like having my own idea of what this person wants in mind. Like that trips you up every single time because it skews the answers that you're getting in responses. And I've done that not just in these beginning interview questions, but as well like when you go back and if you have the opportunity to do user testing, which is something outside the scope of this, but if you're testing what you built and you go through and you ask questions about, okay, find this on the screen or whatever, that trips you up every single time. That's the biggest one that I've made. I think another thing is just purely operating on assumptions and not actually getting validation of those. Like I've done that a couple times as well, to where, I just assume certain things about certain people. Like I was developing an app actually at a previous time in my life here, and we did that. We didn't I was just kind of new to HCD at the time in UX, and we didn't really take as much time to go out and do research as we could. And because of that, we ended up launching a product that no one knew how to use and no one was able to use, and it wasn't useful to the organization. So we actually had to go back and very quickly redesign everything and re-release it. And it was a lot better that second time around because we now had feedback and we now knew what they wanted. But if we had just taken more time to understand their behavior and who they were, we would have avoided that and avoided the cost and the time associated with that.
So that's a great lesson learned. To that principle, you had said you didn't take enough time. How much time do you set aside in your instructional design process to do research? Sometimes it's difficult to do that when your project is always due yesterday.
It really depends on your timeline. So if you have it's due yesterday, which is impossible, then no, you may not have much more than maybe a couple hours to go out and do some research online. And that's why I said like secondary research, it gets you what you need, but it's not as good as if you can go out. Now, so it really just depends, and you have to scale it depending on how much time you have on the project. Like if it's a project that you're going to be taking months to develop, then yeah, you have plenty of time to go out there and say, okay, I have, month one that I'm going to be doing to develop all this stuff and go out and develop good questions, go out and interview a lot of people, send out a lot of surveys. But I've never had that much time. I've never had projects that take months. I usually have weeks or days to complete things. And so with that, I just kind of scale it back to, okay, maybe I have a day where I can go out and do research, or I have half a day that I can go out and do this research. Or like more commonly, I actually in some ways, I'll sometimes start to develop things and learn as you go. I mean, like ideally you do all this stuff right at the beginning, but in some cases, you can continue to learn as you go along as well. So really, I wish there was a good way to tell you how much time, but it really just depends on how much time you have and the information that you're working with as well. Because you might be able to gather enough information to develop a good persona and understand people in a day. It might take you a week or longer to do that. And if you have more time, I'd say take it. It doesn't hurt you to spend spend more time, really digging into this and getting to know. But
getting to know your audience.
Yeah.
I think you've got another slide that can answer some of these, or at least help to answer the next question.
Okay.
If you wouldn't mind moving on to the next one. This one is, can this human-centered design be used for compliance training? Could you address situations where the training content is prescriptive? In safety training, OSHA may mandate topics covered. How do you use these principles to get all the boxes checked for the regulators? Is it important for a workforce that is seeing the same material after?
That is a fantastic question, and one that I can emphatically say yes to, because that's what I work on right now, is safety trainings. And there are a lot of OSHA guidelines and a lot of very stringent ones and complicated things that you have to present, but it's more, so you have the content that you have to present, and that's going to be kind of typical of most courses and experiences that we'll develop. But you can take that and develop it in a way that's engaging, and develop in a way that these learners will learn. And so that comes from what interactions do you use, scenarios do you use, how can you teach that, making sure that you hit all those points, because that's always what we do first. Is we set up, we need to make sure we hit all these points. Well, okay, how do we hit this in the way that Sean will understand? And that's really where it comes into, is how you deliver it versus what the content actually is.
And so when you're saying you're developing that right now, that's the safety training that's there on the screen for customizable courseware.
So customizable courseware, for those of you that haven't experienced it yet, I encourage you to go online and look at it, because it's really a phenomenal product, and it's really something that I'm really proud to be a part of, because what we've taken the concept of off-the-shelf training and decided to flip it on its head and give it a customizable spin. And so like eLearning Brothers, you know us because of our templates. These are courses that are designed to have all the content that you need to get started, and all the content that you need. Like we said, for the safety ones, we make sure that we teach the OSHA specs and regulations on there. But you can go through and brand it for yourself. You can go out and change images for things that are more appropriate. Like there's some of these safety courses that we have to keep so general that you need to go in and actually put in, like forklifts. There are 10 different types of forklifts that you're going to be using, at least 10 actually. I think there might be more. We can't teach to necessarily all 10 of those, so we make sure we give you the general basis, and you go in and throw in, okay, I'm using
the details that are needed,
that you need in there. And so they're a fantastic thing to get started, especially if you don't have much time. We put in a lot of time into these, a lot of time, love, sweat, tears, our whole hearts into these. And so, I mean, that's a little cheesy there, but
I think the principle here is that Josh has been using this principle, these user personas, these maps, to build out these trainings, both safety training, sales training, and the soft skills training. And you can get a sample of those in our free library that I've already mentioned. You'll all get access to if you just check your email if you don't already have one. And you'll be able to download one of these and see what that looks like, see how that information was used in a completed course. If you want to see more of our customizable courseware and more of what Josh has done here at eLearning Brothers, schedule a free demo. Give us a call, 801-796-2767. Visit or email info@elearningbrothers.com, or visit elearningbrothers.com. You can go to elearningbrothers.com/customizable courseware, like that website there on the right, and you can actually schedule a demo there where they can give you all of the information that you need with 2 clicks. It's great. So yeah, check that out. Thank you so much, Josh, for your time. This has been great, very useful. We've got a lot more questions that haven't been answered. We'll make sure that we get those answered when this is posted online. So thanks everybody for joining us, and we hope you all have a great day.
Have a great day, guys.